Ukraine could have pushed for peace at any point. Zelensky made a terrible mistake at the beginning when he made it clear that he would never negotiate with Putin. If you think that this was entirely in the hands of Zelensky and that Zelensky wasn't actually just actively assuming and regurgitating the American State Department position, I also have a separate bridge to sell you. Zelensky is not like an independent actor to the... I know... Okay. Anyway. A victory for Putin. Jeffrey Sachs and Matt Duss debate U.S.-Russia talks to end the Ukraine war. This is Democracy Now! With my goat, Amy Goodman.
Democracy depends on a free press. Please support our independent journalism at democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
I also want to, I don't know, I have no way of contacting him, but I would love to have Jeffrey Sachs or Mersheimer on as well on my broadcast. If you, in the chat, any one of you 32,000, 33,000 people in here, if any one of you have any way of reaching out to Jeffrey Sachs or Mersheimer, I would love to have them on the broadcast.
Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago.
Also
Hi,
my
Juan.
goat.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
We begin today's show with the high-level talks between Russian and U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia, where they're meeting to discuss a possible end to the war in Ukraine and ways to improve ties between Washington and Moscow. The talks include U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and might pave the way for a possible meeting between President Trump and Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Today's talks come less than a week after Trump held a 90-minute call with Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who will be in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday on a separate state visit, was not invited to attend the U.S.-Russian talks. Zelensky spoke to reporters Monday.
Ukraine will not take part in the talks. Ukraine did not know anything about them. Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as ones that have no result, and we cannot recognize any agreements about us made without us, and will not recognize such agreements.
Zelensky also rejected a demand by the Trump administration for Ukraine to give the United States ownership of half of Ukraine's rare earth minerals as compensation for past and future aid to Ukraine. He called for stronger American security guarantees as part of any minerals deal. Meanwhile, at an emergency European summit on Ukraine held in Paris Monday, European leaders were divided on proposals for European troops to be deployed inside Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. While German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said it was highly inappropriate to be discussing sending troops before a peace deal is reached, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer offered to send British troops to Ukraine.
At stake is not just the future of Ukraine, it is an existential question for Europe as a whole, and therefore vital for Britain's national interest. Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement.
Commenting on the meeting, Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, said she was concerned about what she called Russia's imperial dreams.
I am very concerned about making a fast ceasefire because it can actually give Putin and Russia a better possibility to go back to Russia and to re-ramp and to mobilize again, attack Ukraine or another country in Europe.
For more on all of this, we're joined by two guests. From Washington, D.C., Matt Duss is with us, Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy. Former foreign policy advisor for Senator Bernie Sanders. His latest piece for The Guardian.
Remember when I told you guys that I was cautiously optimistic about the ceasefire that Donald Trump pushed for? And I told you that there is still a capacity for Israel to violate the terms and conditions of said ceasefire. But more importantly, Israel will also most likely use this as an opportunity to revamp and then go in and most likely permanently annex the West Bank. Okay. And they have already violated the ceasefire, but it still is, holding on. Now, Now, on that front, my predictions are pretty accurate. Having said that, I still maintain the position that the ceasefire was good. Because it's always good to do a ceasefire. Okay? The reason why I'm prefacing this with my Israel-Palestine statements is because I have the exact same position on Ukraine and Russia. Okay? And yet, when I say the same things for Ukraine and Russia, a lot of people who are well-intentioned people, okay? A lot of people who are well-intentioned people who are pro-Palestinian and pro-Ukrainian misunderstand this as, oh, you love Adolf Hitler, okay? Just understand where I'm coming from. Yes, that this is not contradictory. My statement here is not contradictory.
Democrats have become the party of war. Americans are tired of it. Matt Duss's recent foreign policy piece is it's time for Ukraine to make the best peace it can. And in Brussels, we're joined by Jeffrey Sachs, director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He served as advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General, is now a Sustainable Development Solutions advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres. His piece for Common Dreams is headlined "The War in Ukraine Was Provoked and Why That Matters to Achieve Peace." Let's begin with Professor Sachs in Brussels. You're going to be involved with an event in Brussels tomorrow, the geopolitics of peace.
I'm sorry, dude, but it's a bad position. It gives Russia the upper hand, which is bad. I'm sorry, dude. Ceasefire for Palestine is bad. It's a bad position. It gives Israel the upper hand, which is why it's bad. Like, what upper hand, what more upper hand does Russia need to have in this situation? Notice how the territories that Russia has forcibly conquered and annexed have grown since the last time ceasefire was even on the table. Should we wait for more territory? You know, you said Crimea was a part of Russia. Yes, Crimea is different than Eastern Ukraine. And I've explained it a million times over, but for some weird reason, nobody gives a fuck about all of the reasons as to why it was an entirely different set of circumstances for Russia in terms of overtaking Crimea as opposed to overtaking Eastern Ukraine. Because you're a fucking dumbass, Hasan. Yes, I'm a dumbass. I know. We can just have a disagreement on this issue and you can say I'm a fucking dumbass all day, every day. Your attitude towards Russian expansion is suspicious. I'm not going to lie. If my attitude towards Russian expansion was suspicious, then I would be in favor of Russia expanding into Eastern Ukraine. I would be in favor of all of the actions that have taken place in the past 3 years. I am not. Notice how what I was in favor of when Ukraine had significantly more leverage was still the same process. And if they had actually conducted that 15-point plan, okay, if they had conducted that 15-point plan way back when they had the opportunity to, plenty of additional territory would not have been seized. You've said Russia is the aggressor, but your attitude to Ukrainian sovereignty is just odd. Let's just keep going.
Can you talk about what's happening right now in Saudi Arabia? You have the representatives of President Trump and President Putin who have just been involved with 4 hours of negotiations. You have Zelensky meeting with the Turkish president and now headed to Saudi Arabia for different meetings, and he said nothing about us without us. But can you talk about what's happening now in Saudi Arabia and the possibility of peace?
Good morning, Amy. Good morning, Matt. What's happening in Saudi Arabia is potentially very good news. It could mean the end of a war in which perhaps 1 million Ukrainians have died or been wounded gravely up until now. This is that never should have happened. It came about because of several provocative U.S. actions over 30 years, notably the expansion of NATO against commitments made back in 1990.
Ukraine could have pushed for peace at any point. Zelensky made a terrible mistake at the beginning when he made it clear that he would never negotiate with Putin. If you think that this was entirely in the hands of Zelensky and that Zelensky wasn't actually just actively assuming and regurgitating the American State Department position, I also have a separate bridge to sell you. Zelensky is not like an independent actor to the. I know that everyone is going to get very mad at me for saying this, okay? But he is, for obvious reasons, born out of the Russian invasion, a desperate man desperately trying to save what remains of his country, okay? And in that desperate moment, he will do anything that the United States tells him to say and do, okay? It wasn't up to Zelensky to not negotiate with Putin or to say he's never going to negotiate with Putin. It does not matter what he says in this process. If America, I mean, you'll see it's unfolding in front of our eyes right now, which is why it's so funny when people are like, no, you don't understand. Zelensky was operating autonomously, and it's his fault. When, guess what, dude? You think Zelensky wants to sell $500 billion of natural resources to the United States government? No, he doesn't want to. Does an American colony? I don't think he's in favor of that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he's in favor of. Ukraine is desperate, but Ukraine doesn't hold the cards here. America does. This was naive because Zelensky was never in a position to demand regime change in Russia. In order to preserve Ukrainian lives, you have to negotiate with Putin. Zelensky learned this lesson in the most terrible way imaginable, so we can blame him for much of this. No, none of this was up to Zelensky. It's crazy. Zelensky is simply just the person. Zelensky is simply just the person who is tasked with being the Ukrainian voice, okay? Putting a Ukrainian voice to what America's interests are. People who chirp about your Ukraine takes aren't actually criticizing the takes, they're just upset with the vibes. I know, and the vibes have been primed by people making false assertions about my position on Ukraine for 3 fucking years. And just operating off of that false premise over and over again as they make newer content, which is why so many people unironically are both A, in denial about what is currently ongoing and what's currently happening with the Trump administration. They're just like, I don't get it. Ukraine was always winning the war. The West was always helping Ukraine win the war. Why won't the West just help Ukraine win the war even more than they have? It seems like Trump is really spoiling the deal. Like, yeah, if you believe that Ukraine was always dominating Russians and that Russians still somehow magically overtook more and more Ukrainian territory and forcibly annexed it, then yeah, you're going to be shocked at what is going on. The only reason why you need to give the full argument about self-determination and make the Crimea comparison with Taiwan in regards to who gets self-determination for people to understand your stance. Normies won't understand without the background lore and will keep misunderstanding your position, in my opinion. That's interesting that you say that because I have actually personally talked about that a million times over. They simply say that it doesn't matter what the Western polling indicated in Crimea in terms of like seeing themselves as Russian or wanting to be a part of Russia before the Russian annexation, and that the subsequent sham trials that took place under Russian occupation were also built around falsehoods. They will also then say it doesn't matter that Ukraine's reaction to Crimea's annexation was to destroy the waterways that were built under the USSR that actually that brought water from Ukraine into Crimea in a final act of desperation, which is not something that you would do if you actually cared about the safety of the citizens that was now under Russian occupation. Except they don't care about any of those things. They probably don't know many of those things that happened. And even if they did, they still wouldn't care because it's much better to just simply assume a narrative. That's why I try to hit this from the angle that is the most easy to understand, which is why is it that it has taken 3 years and tens of thousands of lives for Russia to take inches of fucking Ukrainian territory as opposed to how easily Russia overtook Crimea, virtually without a single shot being fired. That's why I asked this question with the hopes that people will think about that a little bit, okay? That's why I also explained to people how major of a mistake it was, aside from the violence, if we were to talk about this from the perspective of states and how states operate, because they don't care about the morality of fucking violence and bloodshed, okay? How bad of a mistake it was for Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine, specifically because all of the territories that might have had any kind of sympathy, like all the cities like Kharkiv, that might have had any kind of sympathy for Russians or felt any sort of like ethnic allegiance to the Russians, now despise the Russians because guess what? They came in and they fucking blew up all of the apartment complexes. Why the fuck would you be in favor of that nation any longer after that happens? Anyway, and when you say Crimea is primarily Russian because of colonialization, though, you're absolutely correct. It's not colonialization necessarily, but it's Russification of Crimea, where they forcibly excised the Tatar, the indigenous Tatar population from Crimea. That happened a very long time ago, however. That is unjustifiable, for sure. But make no mistake, that happened far before Ukraine and Russia became, post-Soviet nation states. That's why I also always say, give Crimea back to the Turks. You know what I mean? As a joke. This is what HasanAbi deals with every damn day. What a legend. Yeah. Tatars were also Genghisid colonizers, not indigenous. Okay, fair, but like, come on. It's like saying Turks are also not indigenous to Anatolia. You're right, but holy fuck, how far back are we going? You know what I mean? Also, the chatter that made fun of me for saying Genghis, that's actually how you're supposed to say it, but we're not even going to fucking get into it. Giving Crimea back to the Turks would be like Israel's state taking Judea and Samaria. Yeah, I'm fucking joking, okay? When I say that, I am joking, but the joke is in the direction of like who Crimea belongs to. Let's continue.
The U.S. participation in a violent coup in Ukraine in February 2014, the U.S.-Ukraine agreement to discard a UN Security Council back to Minsk II.
You have to understand that Crimea situation is mostly because of its importance for military purposes. Your lore you're talking sounds weirdly Russian. No, the lore I'm talking about is just simply the truth. But you're right. It is for military purposes. You're absolutely fucking correct. Which is precisely the reason why even under Ukrainian rule, Crimea still had a very important military base, a very important naval base for Russia, Sevastopol. So yeah, that is correct. Crimea is the entry point of the Black Sea for the Russian Navy. Also, this isn't lore. It's just history. What the fuck? You're making it seem like I'm just telling a story like lore.
Agreement and the failure of the Biden administration to negotiate with President Putin in December 2021 and January 2022. I was personally involved in watching closely all of those events over the past 30 years. This war never should have happened. It could have been averted at many times. It could have ended in negotiation in March 2022, saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. I urged it. The Ukrainians walked away from the table because
I urged it too. And everybody said I was a fucking pro-Russian stooge.
The British and the Americans told them to. This is so tragic, and everyone will understand this as the historians make all of this very clear. I flew to Ankara in the...
Ukraine walked away. I mean, look, the details on this is murky. And didn't Biden literally met with Putin and told him not to invade, and Putin ignored? I don't remember. He might have, but that kind of beefs up Trump's narrative on the matter, doesn't it? Pretty sure they would live better under Turkey than with Russia? Fucking fuck no. Okay, this isn't to say that the Russian Russian rulership over Crimea is good. I'm just simply saying that the Turkish government is not great. Okay, holy fuck. Al birini vura tökine amına koyayım. Yok sikmeyelim Ukraynalıları. Your history sounds like Putin's, one in parts where Ukraine seemingly have not existed prior to dissolution of the USSR or its creation. No, what are you talking about? I am not saying that Ukraine as a nation state has no established national boundaries or is a part of Russia or some shit. I'm not saying that at all. What the fuck?
The spring of 2022 to understand.
Give Ukraine the Crimea, problem solved. Give Crimea, or give Ukraine and Crimea to China. Sorry. Give Ukraine and Crimea to China. Problem solved, okay? They will have fantastic infrastructure in a matter of months. A lot of confusion. Please clarify your stance on what? Who are Tatards? What is Tatards, chat? A lot of confusion. Please clarify your stance. Bro, just Google it, please. I mean, come on. Like, you're like, hey, can you please give me more information so I can, like, cynically dunk on your position further is crazy. Okay? Come on. Just Google it. Google it on your own.
Exactly how these negotiations had broken down. And the United States and Britain were behind it because, as Keith Starmer said in the clip that you played, this is about Europe's security. They're using Ukraine. This is the bottom line. So what's happening, in short, in Saudi Arabia is the most positive news for Ukrainians that there has been in years. President Trump understands, and unfortunately, previous presidents did not, that the U.S. provocations need to stop so this war stops. So
I don't even believe that. Dude, that's crazy. That's giving Trump way too much credit. I think he is, I don't know. I love how libs think Russia will invade even further west for some reason. Dude, I'm not making any predictions, okay? I'm not going to say there's no way Vladimir Putin invades further west, okay? I'm not saying nothing. You understand me? You take that take and you shove it in your pocket, okay? That's not going to come from my mouth. I will never say that. I've learned my lesson, okay? Sachs is too multipolar pilled. Yeah, I don't think Donald Trump is making brilliant brilliant decisions in terms of foreign policy.
So the deaths stop. That is the bottom line. I think it's important for everybody to understand also that on October 5th, 2022, Zelensky ruled out any negotiations. He said it's illegal. This was a declaration of the Ukrainian government. So the government of Ukraine, sadly, really unwisely.
Not the oarfish. The appearance of oarfish is long been linked to folklore where they're considered harbingers of natural calamities like earthquakes and tsunamis. In particular, Japanese mythology views the oarfish as a messenger from the Sea of Dragons god's palace, signaling impending doom. Despite these legends, no scientific evidence supports the myth that oarfish predict disasters. However, their rare appearances on shore have historically coincided with significant seismic events. For instance, numerous oarfishes were seen before the devastating 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Similarly, one was last sighted in California just before a 7-magnitude earthquake last year. Nonetheless, these correlations are merely anecdotal. Oarfish inhabit deep waters worldwide, and their appearances on land might simply be due to sickness or the end of their life cycle rather than prophetic messages of natural disasters. This week, 3 doomsday fish were spotted along the coast of Baja California, Sur Mexico. Known scientifically as the oarfish, these creatures can grow up to 36 feet long and weigh over 440.
멕시코 해변에서 일명 종말의 날 물고기로 불리는 대형 상갈치가 발견되었습니다.
Oh my god, you think it's because oh my god, did woke. Oh my god, the big one might be coming because we eliminated woke. That is literally that's it. God is punishing us because we're eradicating trans active duty service members. It's finally happening. USAID Oarfish program canceled. This earthquake or tsunami is about to destroy so many airplanes. America was being held together by ticker tape. And by that I mean woke. That's the thing. That was the glue that held everything together. Do you feel like you have to soften your foreign policy views due to backlash? It feels like a lot of white Americans and Europeans in chat still have the supremacist mindset they can dictate whatever. When the elections come, Zelensky's going to be chilling in pen with other CIA assets. I mean, I do think that Zelensky's life, no matter what, is probably under serious threat. But yes, of course, I have to soften my foreign policy positions. I soften a lot of my positions. It's normal. It's a normal thing to do. This message is a lot to unpack. The oarfish, or the fact that pronouns were keeping the airplanes in the night sky from falling like shooting stars. I could really use a wish right now. Wish right now. Wish right now.
I've tried many, many times to explain to them. They ruled out negotiations. They ruled them out until today. This is tragic for them. Now they say we want a seat at the table. They said we don't want any table all along. And Zelensky rules by martial law, by decree, when the...
Bro, you were wrong like 3 years ago, not even 2, and people don't let it go. Imagine if you were wrong more often. Yeah, if I was wrong more often, maybe they would just focus on what I'm wrong on instead of making random shit up about me. So maybe I should just say wrong takes every now and then. Just kidding. All of the other shit that they make up about me, they make up because they can always go back and point to Hasan predicted that Russia would never invade Ukraine.
Opinion surveys show that a majority of Ukrainians want peace right now, even at the cost of territorial concessions. So my bottom line, Amy, is that while the Trump administration does some pretty weird things like demanding mineral rights, this is absurd. This is completely bizarre. At the same time, the Trump administration, for the first time, is telling the truth about the fundamental causes of this war and how it can end. And that is the best news possible for Ukraine, first and foremost, and for the United States, for Russia, and for the world, that peace could come to Ukraine very, very shortly. So this, I think, is the bottom line.
Why does anyone care about Ukraine prediction? You're just a streamer. Who cares if you got it wrong? A lot of people, whether that's good or bad, and I think there's some good and some bad there, rely on me for understanding the world.
Line.
So they felt betrayed.
I'd like to bring in Matt Duss into the conversation. Matt, your reaction to the events and the Trump administration's complete reversal of the previous administration's policy, and this whole issue of whether there could have been peace earlier on, but that the Biden administration and the British scuttled the developing peace plan back 2 years ago.
Well, I mean, first off, and again, great to be with you and great to be here with Professor Sachs. I mean, I think, you know, the story that Professor Sachs just told, there are elements of truth to it, but there are also, it's a great deal in there that's misleading and frankly completely one-sided, absolving Vladimir Putin of any responsibility. Vladimir Putin is the one who chose to invade Ukraine, let's remember.
If you're wondering why Bernie Sanders' foreign policy takes are not, you know, not exactly aligned with mine, for example, this is Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor.
Remember, it's important to understand the history.
And I'm not even talking about like Ukraine in general. I'm, you know.
Understand that the role that NATO expansion has played as being seen as a threat to Russia, that is real. That, however, does not explain.
He doesn't work for Bernie Sanders anymore. He's at the center of international politics. But understand that he is still far more progressive than like 99% of think tank heads in the NatSec side of things. Okay, just understand Matt Duss is like infinitely more progressive and infinitely better than virtually every other person. He's just, you know, he's just I don't know. He's a little bit more, you know, I mean, Matt Duss is pretty good, just more liberal, but anti-interventionist. Yeah, he's just a little libbed up.
Vladimir Putin's decision to illegally invade, annex, and occupy parts of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin himself has told us multiple times what his vision for Ukraine is, and that's to retake Ukraine and make it once again part of the larger Russian imperium. So again, important to understand the historical context, but I would really warn against seeing, you know, Vladimir Putin as some kind of innocent victim of American machinations here, which is the story that Professor Sachs seems to be trying to tell. And lastly, it really denies the Ukrainians any agency, any responsibility for their own independence, for their own democracy. The Ukrainians are not simply being treated as instruments of American power here. The Ukrainians have made decisions on their own. Some of them have been wise, some of them very admirable, some of them less so. I think we can discuss that as well. But they have played a major role here, and I think that is what's concerning about these talks going on in Saudi Arabia, is that they're not included, and they have said, President Zelensky has said, that they will not be bound by any decisions made without their participation, which I think we can all agree is quite a legitimate position. Now, having said that, you know, this is not the first time you've had a U.S. administration engaging
I think your take on Ukraine's situation is incorrect. Ukraine right now at least has the attention of the Western world. A ceasefire would diminish the amount of aid it's getting, kind of to whatever Western journalists / Russian propagandists were saying is Kyiv will fall in 3 days. Speaking as a Russian here, what? It was getting no attention when Russia was fucking pummeling Eastern Ukraine. It literally became it became an unpopular but necessary realm of support a year in. And then after October 7, it was done. Okay? After October 7, it was completely done. If you think that like support for Ukraine, I can't speak for Europe. Okay? But as far as like in the United States of America, people don't necessarily give a shit about Ukraine at all. I'm sorry. They don't care about anything. Americans are incredibly selfish. That's why Joe Biden was trying to be like, but see, we're making artillery factories in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's good. And Americans were like, shut the fuck up. Okay, fix the potholes. Shut the fuck up, old man. Fix the goddamn potholes. I don't give a shit. Give me healthcare. Americans care about money and bloodshed? No, American foreign policy is both uniparty and also far away. Okay, you have to understand this. American foreign policy is so far away, much more far away than European foreign policy is. And that is precisely why the attitude is always going to be different in Europe as well, because they're much closer in proximity to the refugees, much closer in proximity to the actual states that are warring with one another. Okay? American foreign policy, due to America's position on the planet, literally, okay, is super fucking far away. So therefore, Americans can simultaneously fancy themselves to be peaceful doves who hate war and reap all of the benefits, or at least the limited amount of trickle-down benefits that they get from destabilizing the global south. This also presents an opportunity, however, because there isn't much pro-war propaganda, with the exception of 9/11, post-9/11 war on terror. Americans themselves fancy themselves to be fucking pro-peace. So a person who comes out and says, I'm pro-peace, can actually use that to their benefit electorally. And guess who did that? Donald fucking Trump. He lied. Okay? But at least he lied when the other side, the Democratic Party, was like, no, we love war. We're going to keep doing more war. And look how well that turned out. Donald Trump is president again. Israel is far too. Where is pro-peace in Palestine? Yes. While Israel is, by proximity, Israel's even further away from Ukraine. Israel's actually much closer to America because it's an American state. Okay. Functionally, it is a literal American state. That pisses off a lot of Americans too. Once again, that pisses off Americans. They're like, what the fuck are we doing? Why do you think there is a significant popular mobilization, a significant popular attitude surrounding pushing for a ceasefire in fucking Gaza? Anyway.
With the government of Vladimir Putin, of course, President Biden met with Putin in June 2020.
Holy Toledo. American support for Ukraine has plummeted since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The percentage who say U.S. is doing too much is up sixfold from 7% to among the GOP. It's north of 60%. U.S. confidence in Zelensky dropped from 72% to under 50%. I've talked about this so many times.
Holy Toledo. Look at this trend line here. U.S. support for Ukraine is too much. Back when the war began, back in February of 2022, it was just 7%. Up like a rocket ship. My goodness. Up now in February of 2025 to 41%. And the clear majority of Republicans, and of course Republicans are in charge of the U.S. government now, 62% of Republicans say that the U.S. support for Ukraine is too much. What a difference from just 3 years ago. I can remember, John, all those backyards in the United States with those Ukrainian flags. Far fewer of them today, as Americans' opinions on Ukraine have changed dramatically.
What about opinions of the Ukrainian president?
Imagine anyone trusting U.S. assurances after they promised Ukraine a NATO membership and it ended up with them potentially losing territory nowhere near NATO. Like, what's the sauce to get the U.S. to support you like they support Israel? Okay. Have significant more. Never mind. Forgot about AIPAC. I mean, AIPAC is one aspect of this. America does not trust Israel all that much, but it trusts it a whole lot more than it does Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, okay, and every other country in the region. Also, the United States never really gave actual assurances to Ukraine in terms of joining NATO. That was always bullshit. And I kept saying that that was bullshit, and everybody fucking yelled at me and said I was pro-Russia. Will those people go back and maybe think, okay, maybe we were wrong and Hasan was right? No, they won't. They'll continue saying I'm pro-Russia over and over again.
Right. You know, obviously, if you would expect changes amongst the public on feelings towards Ukraine, feelings towards Zelensky have changed also dramatically. Look at this. Confident Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. Back in 2022, it was the clear majority, 72% through the floor. Through the floor by 2024, just 48% of Americans say that they're confident that Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs.
I think this also doesn't, like, this right here is not proof of anything other than manufacturer consent and its power. Okay? Like, not only was Zelensky in charge of the wronged party, it made Americans obviously feel like for once they were on the morally righteous side. Even if it was for the wrong reasons, they could shut you the fuck up because they could be like, no, we're on the right side for once. But also, that's the reason why the media fucking pumped the Zelensky stuff everywhere. It's also partially because the situation, as far as the battlefield goes, became impossible to propagandize over. You can't be like, Ukraine is actually fucking winning this war over and over again when Russia is seizing more territory. Americans also fucking hate losers, okay? And by that, I mean our own military as well. They don't have endless appetite for death and destruction, partially because it's always happening on the other side of the world, okay? Why do you think we had to pull out of Afghanistan? Why do you think that we had to diminish our military in Iraq? Why do you think we pulled out of Vietnam? They keep it going for as long as they can, but inevitably they have to pull out because they're like, everyone's like, come on, why are we still doing this?
And GOP confidence has also plummeted dramatically. Now the clear majority of Republicans are not confident that Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. Really a real trend line, ones you rarely see in the American public when it comes to Ukraine and Zelensky. Confidence in both going down through the ground.
Look, some allies of President Trump have targeted Zelensky with harsh criticism over the last few years, and it could be that that's having some impact here.
Absolutely. The Republican establishment, the Republican electorate has moved as the Republican establishment and Republican leaders have moved on.
All right, let's talk about the idea of a peace deal. And again, the way you ask this matters, but go ahead.
The way you ask it is important, so we can talk about this a little bit. So the poll question essentially is, do you support a Russia-Ukraine negotiated peace deal? The vast majority of Americans, this is what they want. 78% say that they support this idea versus just 16% opposed. Of course, as we were...
I don't get it. What matters? Why does it matter what the American public thinks? They don't give a shit about this stuff when it comes to Palestinians. Who gives a fuck, right? That is the truth of it, by the way. It doesn't matter what the American public thinks, but you can always point to this to be like, this is why Donald Trump is doing it.
Talking about, does this question actually get at what's going on right now? I think you would say that it probably does not necessarily get what's going on right now.
No, the question asked, do you support a Russia-Ukraine negotiated peace deal? Ukraine's not there at the negotiations in Saudi Arabia this week, so the people were not asked this. And I do think, in general, if you ask anyone in any poll, do you support peace, peace tends to rate pretty highly.
Peace tends to win. You rarely get 78% of the country agreeing on anything.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, there was another thing that 78% of the country agreed on.
They do agree on the idea of a negotiated peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Whether the majority would agree on a Russia peace deal with Ukraine where Ukraine has nothing to do with it, that might be a different question.
Hard to know. Harriet, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Peace talks isn't a betrayal, though. Biden would have kept the war going. That's a bigger betrayal. What? What betrayal, man? Betray Ukraine for giving them more weapons, for keeping them losing? This poll serves no purpose other than to legitimize our betrayal of Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, it is. It is a betrayal. What the fuck? Look, there was never going to be like a NATO membership, but the fact that they even had the audacity to dangle that as a carrot in front of the Ukrainian population was also, obviously, every single person that said that's not going to happen was treated like a fucking Adolf Hitler supporter. Oh, you love Pootie Poo. You love Pootie Poo. Is this shocking to me that Trump is doing all this? Fuck no. You want to know why it's not shocking? Because this was inevitable. That's what I always say. If you come in here, it's not going to, you know, events that unfold eventually, especially as it pertains to American foreign policy, will not be shocking to you, with the notable exception of Vladimir Putin will never invade Ukraine, because that is a historic failure for himself and incredibly violent for everyone else.
They had a summit trying to address some issues of.
Also, another part of this process that I will at least admit I was wrong on is the fact that the Vivek Ramaswamy sentiment and the Tucker Carlson sentiment about we must use Russia against China is unironically the fucking position that these guys are like trying to say is the next step forward for foreign policy.
Tension in the U.S.-Russia relationship. And I think this also goes to the point that President Biden did not seek a conflict with Russia. There were efforts made to avert the invasion. There was
You support Vivek? No, I don't fucking support a war against China, chat. What are you talking about?
Intensive diplomacy between the U.S. and Russia, also between the U.S.'s allies, Germany, France, UK, and Russia, leading up to the February 2022 invasion. And I think it's worth taking that into account. Now, should more have been done? Perhaps. We can't know, but I think Vladimir Putin has told us repeatedly about his very expansive goals and what he really hopes to achieve in Ukraine. And it's not just about NATO. I mean, this should not be news to anyone here. Again, getting back to the talks in Saudi Arabia, if there is a workable peace agreement to be had, that's good. But I do think even the fact that these talks are happening between the United States and Russia, that is a victory for Putin. We have to understand that. Putin's vision for Russia's role and for the, you know, the eventual dispensation for Ukraine.
I hate this. I don't like this narrative. Like, oh, we're rewarding Putin. We're rewarding Putin. No, man. Like, there's no. Like this is the same shit that like Israel says. We're rewarding Hamas if we, you know, do a ceasefire. Or I guess like I guess if from the pro-Palestinian perspective, it would be like, oh, we're rewarding Israel if we do a ceasefire. Like, no, just stop. Just stop the conflict, please. Holy shit. What do you mean rewarding a person? Okay? You can't use morality to change the field of battle. It literally doesn't work. I want it to work, but it doesn't work that way. But your whole solution seems very short-sighted. I can agree that Ukrainians deserve no more fighting, but what does that do when Russia just knows they can go in anywhere? Honest question. It's a great question, and I don't know what the answer to that question is. I genuinely don't know, okay? Russia invading Ukraine has already justified the existence of NATO for many other regional partners, including the two nations that now joined NATO. Okay? I think if I'm gonna close my eyes and think like how this unfolded this way, I think that Vladimir Putin is smarter than Donald Trump. And as a person that is smarter than Donald Trump, that knows that Donald Trump reveres him to a certain degree, he used that influence he has over Donald Trump to his advantage by actively making him undermine Ukraine. Donald Trump was already ready to undermine Ukraine because there is a lot of appetite within the American Republican population in terms of cutting aside any sort of allegiance or loyalty that Americans have to Ukraine. And that's the reason why Zelensky is not a part of these talks, because at the end of the day, you're the United States of fucking America. What do you mean Ukraine doesn't get a seat at the table? If you wanted to, you could have brought Zelensky there and put his nutsack on the fucking table. Do you think Vladimir Putin would say no Zelensky if America truly wished for Zelensky to be at the table? That's what I think. I think that Vladimir Putin wanted to optically fuck over Zelensky to potentially further destabilize Ukrainian politics, to make Ukrainians, by force, understand the reality that they have no say in this process. And Donald Trump being someone who is definitely, I think, persuadable, especially by the likes of someone like Vladimir Putin, played ball, thinking that he was going to get a great deal out of this. Okay? That's what I think. Because whether Zelensky is at this table or Zelensky is not at this table does not change the dynamic of this back and forth, okay? It's still very much in the hands of the United States of America to decide how this is going to happen. Russia and the United States are the primary parties here, okay? Because no matter how much liberals yell at me for saying this, it is still very much a proxy war, okay? And it's not just me saying that. Whenever the likes of Senator Blumenthal or Liz Warren or Lindsey Graham or numerous other foreign policy liberals and Republicans both repeat the reality that this was a fantastic bargain for us because for 5% of our military budget, we were able to undermine a foreign adversary's military by 50%. I'd say that's a great deal, especially when you consider that not a single American soldier had to die in the process. They mean it. They mean that shit. Okay? The American military-industrial complex was able to offload a lot of weapons in the process. American businesses were able to take advantage of the fire sale that took place inside of Ukraine. And they will continue to gut Ukraine for all that remains in this process. They took the maximum advantage. America won out like a fucking bandit from Vladimir Putin's mistake. They won, beefed up loyalties for NATO, justified the existence of NATO, brought 2 other nations into NATO. Number 2, were able to cut off Europeans from utilizing Russian gas, undermining their economy, just completely destabilizing them without any care whatsoever, and then forcing their hand to purchase American gas. Okay? And of course, last but not least, most significantly, they were able to sell offshore a bunch of fucking weapons. That's it. America is the party that makes out like a bandit here, okay? Far more than Russia did. Having said that, if you think that like whether Zelensky is at this table or not changes the dynamic of the back and forth, you're wrong. Okay? You're wrong. This was still always going to be whatever America says goes. But I do think the reason why they cut Zelensky out of this equation was to give a symbolic W to Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin, one, was able to very successfully create pro-Russia sentiment amongst the dumbest of American hogs who for their entire lives despised Russia and the red commies, only to get brain broken by one fucking Telegram group, okay? And develop loyalties for Russia somehow. But also, they were able to take advantage of the lack of appetite many Americans have due to their selfishness in many instances to constant war that's happening and constant destabilization that's happening. They were able to also create a massive inflation crisis in the United States of America through OPEC Plus, which the American oil manufacturers, oil producers also played ball with because, as they openly stated time and time again, that they had no interest in doing what was best for the American population, despite the billions of dollars in subsidies that they were receiving from the American government, and that OPEC Plus's limitations on oil barrels was actually to their benefit. And it really was to their benefit. They made more money in this process. So they were able to destabilize America and create a lot of anger and resentment towards Biden, create a lot of, understandably, which Biden did to himself as well because he's just an incompetent fucking cadaver. They were then also simultaneously able to basically get Donald Trump to play ball this way and even symbolically fuck over Ukraine because America was always fucking over Ukraine. But now it's in broad daylight. Bro, the Russian diplomat team is stacked and the American one is a real estate developer. That's fucking Steve, his goddamn name. He is the great peacekeeper, okay? Are you kidding me? That's Steve fucking Witkoff, Donald Trump's golfing partner, okay? Do you understand who you're talking about? That's my goat right there. Yeah, the Witkoff factor, as they're calling it. Yeah, Vladimir Putin's probably never been so scared and also turned on at the same time until he sat across the table from American real estate developer and Donald Trump golfing buddy Steve Witkoff. Look at Lavrov. He's shaking in his boots. He does not know the brilliant mind of Steve Witkoff. He will learn.
Is that this is something to be worked out between Russia and the United States, between these two great powers. He sees Russia as a rising force. Again, he's trying to kind of reestablish Russia as a great empire, a great force in global affairs. And his vision of how global affairs should work is that the great powers make decisions and the lesser powers just have to deal with it. Their concerns are of very little concern. And unfortunately, I think that is something we've seen from the Trump administration too, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza. It's that the powerful make decisions and the weak just deal with it. I mean,
that is what it is. That's what America's always done. I'm sorry, Matt Duss. What the fuck kind of nonsensical world are you existing in at the Center for International Policy, or CIP, which is a pretty good think tank, by the way, overall. But like what? That is the case. That's just the case. What do you mean? Look at the Kurds. Look at everywhere that we have had conditional allegiances with, okay? I mean, what is it? The Sean McCarthy or whatever. I mean, there's a reason why this exists. Okay. Gaddafi went from foe to ally. America's lost ally. Brave warrior, brave anti-Soviet warrior fighting for liberation. Manuel Noriega, from U.S. friend to foe. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. Osama bin Laden. Exclusive. CIA files prove America helped Saddam as he gassed Iran. When haven't we done this? How many fucking times have we done this? And people still go, oh, I don't understand. I thought America was the most moral nation. What the fuck's happening? What? I thought we had moral ambitions in Ukraine. This is so shocking to me. What are you, a fucking baby? Are you a child? Do you have a baby brain? When has America been a good friend? Wait 10 more years to see what happens to the Zelensky of Syria, okay? Just wait. Just fucking wait. If we make it out alive of the first Trump regime, okay? Wait till you see what they got in store for Mr. Former Al-Qaeda. So strange how this always happens, dude. How does this always happen? The worst aspect of this is that the worse conditions get for American empire, the more like economic allies we're gonna fucking lash out at as we just die out, you know. But the death of an empire doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen quietly. I really did think the one guy we could put on this list was maybe Benjamin Netanyahu, but he is held strong, baby. Holy shit.
That's just, and more importantly, I don't think that's going to lead to a sustainable peace. So listen, if they do come out of these talks with a workable and sustainable and durable peace agreement for Ukraine, one that protects Ukraine's democracy, one that protects Ukraine's sovereignty, we should all support that. But without the participation of Ukraine, I'm very, very skeptical that we're going to get anything like that.
And Jeff Sachs, what about that? It is the Ukrainians who are actually fighting against Russia, and yet the Trump administration seems to feel that it can negotiate without Ukrainians present. And in addition to that, I wanted to ask you another issue. There's been a lot of emphasis on these rare earth minerals that Trump raised, but there has been, according to many reports, massive buying of Ukrainian land by American agribusiness companies. Can you tell us anything about that, the validity of these claims?
Sure. The American role in this has been quite sordid for a very, very long time. The goal, starting back in 1994, was to expand NATO and surround Russia in the Black Sea region. President Clinton signed off on that in 1994. Zbig Brzezinski wrote about it in the Grand Chessboard in 1997, explaining it and explaining in a chapter that is completely wrong when you look back at it, said Russia will not be able to resist any of this. In 2002, the U.S. destabilized the relationship by unilaterally abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty. In 2008, the United States invited Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. Basically,
that's my goat, George W. Bush, baby. GWB, still the #1 bad guy. Like, actually, his administration is still the worst. Still worse than Donald Trump, which is crazy because Donald Trump is doing a lot of stuff that might put him above W finally, because he didn't come anywhere near close to W's death and destruction and destabilization the first time around. But it's kind of crazy because a lot of people forget all the stuff that GW did at the end of his tenure. Okay. Obviously, you had the housing market crash and stuff too, which kind of made people forget this. But like, George W. Bush is literally George W. Bush's administration destabilized the Palestinian position even further by forcing them to have an election when their own guys, like the Fatah people, were like, we're not ready for an election. The Palestinian population hate us. We will lose this election. And they did. They lost to Hamas as the American-backed Fatah correctly called out. Then George W. Bush was like, oh shit, you guys lost? Okay, well, all right, I guess it's time to do a coup, which then caused Hamas to solidify their position. Okay, that's the Palestine stuff. Okay, that's the Palestine part of the equation. On the other side, George W. Bush, on his way out, literally said, we should let Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. Okay, that's what he said. Just leaving office, he's like, you know what would be great as my final act after so much death and destruction, so much destabilization. Okay, we should let Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And then, of course, predictably, Russia, hearing that, was like, fuck no, you won't. And then they immediately took a part of Georgia. Immediately. Like right after. And they were like, no, that's not fucking happening. Here we are.
Over strong objections by the Europeans, but the Europeans went along in the NATO Bucharest summit in 2008 over Russia's brightest red lines. This was all known, understood provocations. All of the diplomats knew it. European leaders knew it. I spoke with them at the time. Everybody understood this. In February 2014, the United States participated actively in a violent coup to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, who favored neutrality. This is very important to understand. The coup took place on February 22nd, 2014. Again, I saw some of this with my own eyes. It was ugly, the U.S. involvement in this coup. U.S. forces paid for this coup to an important extent. They stirred up this coup. This is all well understood. Now, in 2015,
I mean, I don't know if he was in favor of neutrality. I think Ukraine has been stuck between the Western sphere of influence and Russian sphere of influence with no real pathway towards actual absolute sovereignty in perpetuity. Okay? While there are certainly state elements that took part of the revolutions that were happening all around the world, and certainly in Ukraine as well, there was also plenty of anger and resentment towards Yanukovych as well. This is something that I mention all the fucking time. America does not have like magical mystical powers of just like automatically creating resentment amongst the population. No matter how much US aid funding and no matter how many NGOs and civil society organizations that they run, own, and operate inside of countries that they want to influence, there has to be real anger and real resentment. Okay? It's not magic, it's just the CIA. No, I think this is the left position that I think deserves more nuance, that leftists also automatically give so much credit to CIA over. Color revolutions are not as simple in the way that a lot of leftists claim they happen. Okay? Like, I guess I'm a centrist in this regard. Okay? I'm a centrist when it comes to color revolutions, in the sense that there are real resentments, real anger, real frustration from the population, and then the CIA or other State Department elements, or, sometimes it's a homegrown reactionary movement that overtakes these movements and uses them in the interests of American empire. USA adds fuel to the fire. It does not create the fire. Exactly. Clinton was caught on tape talking about designing the coup government. It was definitely a CIA op. There was a basis of support for the coup, especially in the more cosmopolitan section of the western part of Ukraine, but it was a coup even if the coup government had lots of support. Yeah, but you still can't. I wouldn't say that Yanukovych was favoring neutrality. And you also still can't say that there wasn't real resentment towards the existing form of governance. Now, the irony, of course, is that Ukraine has never really had a non-corrupt government, okay? The Zelensky government was also very corrupt. And this is not my assessment. The only reason why I know about this shit is because at the time, before the invasion of Ukraine, there were plenty of foreign policy papers that actively talked about how corrupt the Ukrainian government was. Of course, all of that went away when Vladimir Putin did the unthinkable and the absolute immoral move of invading Ukraine. He was favoring the better deal. The Russian loans have better terms than the IMF loans being pushed by the U.S. and the EU. The IMF and U.S. wanted privatizations of state-owned enterprise and cost the heating assistance. Well, they got it. They got it. The West ultimately won, partially because articles written by Russian-bought propagandists, yeah, articles written by Russian-bought propagandists like Foreign Policy Magazine, or, I don't know, even fucking Voice of America, which is literally operated by the CIA, was talking about how fucking corrupt. The Center for Investigative Reporting, or what is it, the International Consortium of Journalists, and ProPublica are not Russian-bought propagandists. They're just actively... The Panama Papers were not fucking Russian-bought propagandists when they investigated a million different, investigated all of this corruption and offshoring that both Zelensky and his administration and many other governments were engaging in. Okay? The idea that like nobody wrote about Ukrainian corruption before and the only people that wrote about it were Russian-bought propagandists is ridiculous. Okay? Voice of America, nothing compared to the evil of RT. No, they operate in the same exact way. What are you talking about? They are literally the same. Yeah. Anyway, even if it was in the U.S. interest for the coup, you can't say there wasn't overwhelming grassroots sentiment. No, that is what I'm saying. That's precisely my point. I'm saying that there was definitely real support on the ground for change. I think that saying that there wasn't is ridiculous. But once again, especially with the case of Ukraine, America's involvement in these countries is rarely for real, moral, ultimately good reasons. It's never for the good reasons. It's for this reason, because this means you have to privatize all of your state-owned enterprise. You have to sell it to foreign capital. Okay, that's it. Which, you know, things that Trump is doing right now, by the way, things that Trump is doing right now, that is the reason why I say America is the one that won the most out of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
The war could have ended with the Minsk II agreements. But the United States and Ukraine, despite the UN Security Council backing, said, no, you don't have to do that. That was not a territorial claim on the Donbass by Russia. It was a claim for autonomy that the UN Security Council unanimously supported, and the U.S. and the governments in Ukraine, at the U.S. behest to an important extent,
Yeah, not for good reasons, but why is Trump suddenly bending the knee to Russia instead of continuing the war? Wait, what? No. America's interest in Ukraine isn't just to like undermine Russian Russian influence in the country. Russia already gave them that massive W, gave America that massive W. America's interest is money. Donald Trump, when he says we're going to take all your natural resources, is basically trying to take whatever remains of the whatever remains of Ukraine's resources, whatever remains as a sector of profit from Ukraine. That's it. And it's not like he's hiding it. He doesn't have the capacity to fucking he doesn't have the capacity to engage in any sort of song and dance. He just like very openly says what he's thinking at any given moment. If Ukraine still had more manpower to throw at the problem without truly collapsing, because they now have to draw from much younger population of men, then Trump would have continued the war. It's that simple. He'll take the resources whether Ukrainians fight or not. Ukraine simply doesn't have the manpower. This is something that I've been talking about for the past fucking year at this point. Doesn't that benefit Russia long-term wise? You destroy Ukraine past the Americans to pick it apart even more, then the population will fall back into Russian arms? Not really. And also, America's never been exactly... America's never had foresight capabilities, I think, when it comes to its foreign policy. We don't give a shit about the long term. We care about the short term.
Completely dissed. And then it's true that Biden and Putin met in 2021. But in December 2021, President Putin put on the table a draft U.S.-Russia security agreement. It was a completely negotiable document. I spent quite a bit of time speaking with the White House about that document. There should have been negotiations. The U.S. rejected negotiation over the central point, which was non-NATO enlargement to Ukraine. Biden knew what he was doing. It was a terrible mistake of the Democrats, let me say, and of President Biden and his team. Then in March 2022, just days after the start of Russia's invasion, but by the way, the war had been going on for years, but this escalation in starting February 22nd, 2022, just days after that, they went to the negotiating table. And they came very close to an agreement until the U.S. and Britain stopped it. Bojo, Boris Johnson, one of the most irresponsible politicians in our modern time, explained it explicitly later. He said this is a war about preserving Western hegemony. Yes, this was a proxy war against Russia. This was the plan all along. And the U.S. and U.K. told Zelensky, basically. Again, as I said earlier, I went to Ankara to discuss this in detail with the diplomats. I know the details of what happened. Ukraine left the negotiations.
The Boris Johnson argument is still being spewed. I've never heard a decent counter to why Boris Johnson was not simply reasserting America's position to Ukraine, like, and how that played a role. Like, what's the counter to that? That like Russia was never interested in the ceasefire at that point at all? Is that what it is? I don't know why people always get mad at that. Like, people got mad at me for saying that when it was happening at the time, because the conditions the Russians set out were fucking insane. Were they? Because they had less territory back then. Now they're taking more territory. But also simultaneously, like, there was assurances from the Zelensky side that I thought was a pretty good deal. I'm going to tell you something right now. If Donald Trump were to be able to take the negotiations back to that 15-point plan, okay, even liberals would be like, wow, I can't believe how much territory he gave back to Ukraine, how much territory he captured for Ukraine. That's what they would say, because that was objectively a better time to do a deal. Okay? This is the take you lose me on. Chatters never follow up back to this. The only absurd term Russia had was giving complete disarmament. Yeah, that's never going to happen. I will also say they were asking for land they did not control, which is a non-starter for Ukraine. Yeah, they didn't even fucking finish the talks. Like, the talks never actually came to fruition. Yes, there are non-starters on the Russian position for sure. It doesn't matter. It's meaningless. Yeah, of course Russia's going to say that. That doesn't mean anything.
Could have ended this in March 2022 with few deaths, and instead there have been nearly 1 million deaths since then. This has been, unfortunately, a game of the United States for 30 years that Zbig Brzezinski spelled out in 1997. The U.S. thought that...
Bad take. So let Russia have land that don't belong to them. When did I say that, man? What are you talking about? He even said that he would hold a referendum 15 years later about Crimea, which is a way to basically push the conversation back to a position where, without like conceding that he's fully giving up on Crimea. Okay? Is that what you guys are talking about in terms of like land acquisition that doesn't belong to them or some shit? Jeff Sachs sounds like a Russian apologist. He really said nothing critical about them. It's all the West. Yeah, you should have seen what this man used to... You should have heard Jeffrey Sachs in the 90s, okay? This man is perhaps most responsible for what came after the collapse of the USSR.
They had the upper hand at every time. It was the economic sanctions or the weapons that were going to bring Russia to its knees. It was incredibly naive. I said so for many, many years.
Professor Sachs.
I said Ukraine...
Everyone knows Hasan is a Putler dick rider. What did he say again before Putler invaded? Ask yourself why you have to point to something which was an incorrect prediction from 3 years ago and not anything else in the 3-year framework. Do you think that this is an appropriate way to analyze my position, or, or any number of different things that I've said and done before and after? Ridiculous.
I said Ukraine will become the Afghanistan of Europe, and so it has. Now, today in Saudi Arabia, maybe Ukraine can be saved from what the U.S. deep state set along the path of the last 25 years.
Professor
and this is
Sachs,
the biggest hope of today.
Professor Sachs, Matt Duss said he agreed with a lot of what you said, and I was wondering...
You've always said this is Putler invading and taking back Ruski lands? Okay, well... Yeah, never mind. I didn't realize this chatter was just... simply hallucinating.
If you agree with him in condemning Russia's invasion in 2022.
Of course I condemn Russia's invasion, and of course I condemn the reasons for the provocation. I condemn the destabilization of the nuclear framework, which was the most of all in this. The United States walked out of the ABM Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty unilaterally and would not negotiate with the...
Remember when he said Putler opened the oldest vault? Okay, that is true. He did open it. That's facts.
Russians over this. The United States overthrew a government in Ukraine. The United States refused to negotiate with the Russians over basic security issues. This is a tragedy, but the core of the tragedy is U.S. unipolarity assumed by the neocons as early as 1992, put in place by Clinton starting in 1994, and it's been a consistent U.S. policy up until today, basically. And Trump is actually, amazingly, it seems, trying to change it, which is unbelievable for us. I voted for Biden, of course. I was also an advisor to Bernie Sanders. I just want to be clear. This is a shock to me that it's coming from this side of the American politics. The Dems became warmongers.
Matt Duss,
period.
That certainly also reverberates with your title about the Democrats becoming the party of war. The latest news out of Riyadh, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says officials at U.S.-Russia talks agreed to restore embassy staffing, create a high-level team to negotiate peace in Ukraine. Peace.
Okay, Matt Duss, do you have any answer to this?
Biblical icons depicting Jesus, the Virgin Mary, Abraham or King David with dark skin? If not, it's time to look beyond Europe, as Russia has recently unveiled biblical icons featuring darker-skinned figures. You might be wondering if Russia has its own unique interpretation of these biblical characters, but
Russia opens its centuries-old vaults to reveal Jesus was black and other biblical Israelites.
The truth is quite different. These icons represent a factual and untouched reflection of history, as real as the unexplored horizon of time. They are not merely artistic anomalies. They hold deep meanings that shed light on hidden truths, sparking profound questions about history, faith representation, and the unexpected aspects of religious art. Let's delve into the most recognizable figure in the world today, Jesus.
Why do you think Africans on Twitter love Russia so much? Shit like this is aimed at them. Moldova Mama Liga. I think the loyalty, or rather the support that people in Africa have for Russia has very little to do with this kind of misinformation. I'm sure it's part of it, but has a lot to fucking do with the fact that, you know, they might have had some resentment towards Western powers. Okay? Unless you think China also is doing this kind of thing and they're saying Xi Jinping opened up the world's oldest vault and found out that Jesus was black. I think a lot of people living in the global south just fucking despise Western superpowers. I don't know, for some reason. And they probably look at Russia as like the only country that's fighting back. Now, are they correct? No, I don't think they're correct for this assessment. Okay? I'm just explaining to you what their assessment is. Okay? You see what I'm saying?
As stated in Mark 4:22, for there is nothing hidden which shall not be manifested, neither anything kept secret that would not be brought to light. For centuries, the prevalent image of Jesus Christ, particularly in Western cultures, has portrayed him as a fair skin with long wavy light brown or blonde hair, often depicted with blue eyes. However, the Bible provides limited descriptions of Jesus' physical appearance. Most of our knowledge about Jesus comes from the first 4 books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. According to the Gospels, Jesus was a Jewish man, born in Bethlehem and raised...
This is 20 minutes long. Oh my God. Oh wait, let's watch this part. Hold on.
Moscow Cathedral. This arises a debate.
Society and has sparked widespread conversations and a sense of wonderment surrounding this subject.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has decided to move one of Russia's holiest icons from a museum to a Moscow cathedral. This arises a debate around Putin's growing reliance on the church.
Emphasizing on the importance of the holy icon, Putin ordered Andrei Rublev's Trinity be transferred to the Russian Orthodox Church from Moscow's Tretyakov Gallery for a year. The relocation of Russia's most well-known icon highlights how closely the war has intertwined politics and religion. The icon depicts the Oak of Mamre, where the 3 angels visited Abraham in the book of Genesis.
Have you observed a remarkable aspect about the icons showcased here? They are all predominantly black in color. These icons, originating from the 14th century, have been gathered from private collections throughout Russia. They represent...
I love this shit, dude. This is a 20-minute AI video. This is a 20-minute AI video talking about something that just simply did not happen. Like Vladimir Putin opens the oldest vault to reveal that Jesus Christ was actually black. I fucking love that, dude. I mean, this is my shit. All right, let's get back to these liberals now, okay? Discussing silly things. They are afraid of discussing the truth that Vladimir Putin opened the world's oldest vault and revealed the truth that Jesus was a black Israelite.
And promote economic cooperation. Your thoughts on this and where this history goes from there?
Yeah, I mean, I read that readout. I think it's interesting. I would also note that in that one of those points is not just economic cooperation, but, quote, investment opportunities. So again, it really does seem like the Trump administration is not just trying to make peace, but trying to, talk about potentially dividing the spoils with Russia. And that is very concerning because I don't think that's going to lead to a sustainable and durable peace agreement. But again, in basic terms, it's good and fine that the United States and Russia are talking. We need to talk to our adversaries more generally. I think that's always true. But the details will matter. And again, Ukraine's buy-in is absolutely necessary for this. This is not an agreement that can be made over their heads. And I do want to step back and just respond to a couple of things that Professor Sachs said in the kind of history that he laid out to me, that the Ukrainians themselves play little, if any, role in the history that Professor Sachs just lays out. This idea that 2014 was just a U.S.-backed coup is false. Yanukovych was overthrown after one of the largest demonstrations in Ukraine's history, known as the Euromaidan. It was not the case that Yanukovych simply wanted to make Ukraine neutral. He wanted to draw Ukraine closer to Russia in a way that an overwhelming majority of Ukrainians rejected. So we need to understand the history in all its complexity here. The Ukrainian people played a major role in that event. They played a major role in the decision to resist quite admirably.
Guys, please stop yelling at Mad Duss for... No, it's ridiculous. Yes, there is a State Department involvement in it, but it doesn't change the reality that Yanukovych was, he was going closer and closer to the Russian sphere of interest and influence. And also simultaneously, people absolutely were angry. Like, he was not popular, man. The fuck? How many times does this have to happen globally for you guys to recognize that, like, yes, America takes advantage of real popular sentiment on the ground?
And courageously the Russian invasion of their own country. Now, going back to the negotiations in March of 2022, I think to treat the talks that took place in Turkey as if they would have simply ended the war, again, is not accurate. Now, there were interesting possibilities in those talks. There's little evidence that Putin himself was completely bought in. I'm very skeptical that, having launched a major invasion a month before, he would have been willing simply to end that invasion. But again, this story that Professor Sachs is telling of the United States as the major manipulator and the key problem, and everyone else is simply reacting to what the United States does, I think does not really reckon with reality. I'm certainly a critic of U.S. foreign policy. I'm a strong critic of the Biden administration's foreign policy. But I do think if we want to have a real and honest discussion about where U.S. foreign policy has failed and where it needs to go, we need to reckon with the actual complex history of these events, and it's not just a story of unending U.S. villainy.
And Matt, just briefly, because we're running out of time for this segment, the Trump administration has also been pushing for increased military expenditures by the NATO countries. From 2%, now he wants 5% of their GDP in terms of military spending. What's your response? Because obviously the United States, as the main producer of weapons in the world, would benefit from such increased military spending by the various countries of Europe.
Right. I mean, this is a point that Trump has made repeatedly, and not just Trump. And I mean, if you remember, Barack Obama was also someone who was pushing NATO member countries to meet their commitments. By raising that commitment is something very interesting from Trump if he expects that they'll be buying these weapons from the United States. But I think one potentially interesting positive consequence of Trump's approach here is that if it really does force the Europeans to finally, at long last, start taking more serious steps to see to their own security. I mean, some of the comments that were played earlier from Keir Starmer, I'm not so sure about the idea of UK troops patrolling Ukraine, but just the fact...
Bro, Keir Starmer walked that back at the end of his statement. He couldn't even hold on to a security commitment without recognizing that this security commitment is completely and utterly meaningless if America's not on board with it. Like, yes, we're going to send troops into Ukraine to defend the Ukraine. And if America is not a part of the bargain, then we won't do it, because that would be silly.
That you see European governments now stepping up and looking with a bit more urgency about their own responsibilities.
Like, I think it's funny to think that Europe, in all of this madness and chaos, okay, especially with like America being like, yeah, fuck you, all right, we do what we want and there's nothing you can say about it, are going to turn around and be like, well, I guess it's time to defend Ukraine. Like, maybe, okay, I just think it's unlikely, all right? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not making any predictions on this issue, okay? It's like, I feel like you got a lot more problems to worry about internally right now in every single one of those countries, especially with the insane growth of fascist politics in every single one of these countries. Where are they going to get those weapons from? Yeah, that's the other side of the bargain, which is like, they're still using American weapons to do this. So, hey, we get to make money. Don't worry. That was not a prediction that came out of my mouth. I would never make a prediction about Russia-Ukraine affairs, except I have for the past 3 years. And with the exception of that one that everybody yells about, every other thing has basically come to fruition in front of our eyes, unfolding, and people are still mad at me for some reason.
In their own neighborhood. I do think that could have potential, positive consequences for the United States, given the way that, the U.S. Security architect is something that helps buttress our own military-industrial complex and diminishes and, I think, really corrupts our own democracy. So anything that weakens the military-industrial.
I think one of the funniest arguments I remember at the time was because people were trying to turn this into like a fuck Hasan thing, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. One of the things that people tried to say in terms of like what kind of material harm I've individually caused was Hasan's Ukrainian fans probably trusted him and didn't evacuate in time and died. Yeah, my Ukrainian fans were listening to me and trusting me more than they were trusting their own fucking state, which was saying the exact same thing I was saying. Yeah, they tried to say I have blood on my hands. Yeah. No, they were probably listening to, Ukrainian media and also Ukrainian politicians who were also saying the same things that I was saying. My haters always make it seem like I'm materializing just like false information and not like, responding to what Ukrainian resources were saying as well.
Complex, I would say, is all to the good.
Matt Duss, we want to thank you for being with us. Center for International Policy, former foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, and economist Jeffrey Sachs, speaking to us from Brussels at the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. We'll link to all of your articles, both Matt and...
The last thing found on thousands of Ukrainian screens was the HasanAbi broadcast. I mean, there were Ukrainian chatters. And there still are Ukrainian chatters of this fucking community. They, like, what the fuck? And they all now know the truth about Vladimir Putin opening up the world's oldest vault to uncover the truth about Jesus.
Parts of West Africa. Subsequently, they were sold as slave individuals mentioned in the Bible. But
this video is so awesome. What the fuck is Money Johnson? It's just a Facebook post from Money Johnson. Because black people were in the Bible, that the Americans turned white men, that they told the stories to us, but Russians didn't get the memo. They went off the real story. Songs of Solomon.
But when the stories were conveyed to Americans, they were whitewashed. However, Russians seem to have disregarded this alteration and pursued genuine historical accuracy. Johnson references the Songs of Solomon 1-5 and Revelations 1:15 in the Bible, urging others to verify this information for themselves.
Wait, I want to see the Biden part.
Who were black. He further criticizes the United States, labeling it as a great deceiver. Many people inherit incorrect narratives from their ancestors, which become deeply ingrained, turning lies into perceived truths. However, Johnson asserts that the real answers are right in front of us.
Who is Money Johnson? What do you mean Johnson asserts? Wait, what is this?
Depictions of black people in biblical scenes, which is knowledge that is not taught in the American educational system. However, debates concerning the authenticity of these
Okay. We're done with this. Anyway,